pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today.
It would have been easy for me to go to class today. It is easy for a person on the outside to say that I just wanted to get out of class. It is easy to accept things as they are and not challenge them. That is not what Dr. King wanted or stood for. He did not take the easy way out.
It's important that kids understand that today and what we have today didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen, by coincidence. It happened because, there's a story of people standing up for what they believe in. It's a story of people just having an ideal or a vision about a better future.
On Martin Luther King Jr. Day of 1989, an 18-year-old by the name of Brian Gittens made school history. He sat on these very steps from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night, skipping all his classes and making the point that regular academic classes should not overshadow the importance of Dr. King's birthday. On January 16th of 1989, he said, "You get to the point where talking about it and thinking about it is not enough. Something has to be done, direct action taken." This seemed like the perfect opportunity. There is much more to this story, however. This isn't so much the story of an individual protest led by a brave and courageous senior, but rather the story of a historical institution grappling with the issues of race, gender, class, and all the isms of life. Kathy Royal, Phillips Academy's first dean of the Office of Community and Multicultural Affairs, defines the challenges she faced in her tenure in the 1980s.
I'm Kathy Royal, and I am part of Andover's class of 86. I came to Andover in 1986 with J. Marshall Rogers, whom I adored. He and I were the two people of color, the two African-American faculty who joined the Andover community at the same time. We were not the first, but we came together as that class, as we affectionately called ourselves. And I started in the English department, and I came as the minority counselor.
In earlier times, a black student felt like a guest at a white school when they came to Andover. And I think the challenge that we were struggling with, and I think Andover and other schools still struggle with, is how do we make it truly multicultural, and how do we have it so that everybody participates in it. And it went to things like what music gets played on Saturday night, or what food is served in the dining hall, and are they things that make everybody feel comfortable and at home, or aren't they?
During my tenure, probably the biggest issues revolved around race still, and what it meant to acknowledge it, to be challenged by it, to understand it, and to understand how race then, in the past, and still affects the way we function as a society.
But there was no place where you gathered and had conversations about home and culture and ethnicity and race and racism. It was almost as if the campus did not allow it. You could not have that conversation with any authenticity.
CAMD was created to provide spaces and places to encourage us to truly be our authentic selves.
That multicultural piece was very important because we wanted to reach beyond just, I guess, the normal definition of diversity. Andover has been a diverse place for a very, very long time in terms of its numbers and bringing kids from different experiences, faculty, percentages, and things of that nature. But we wanted to strive to do a little bit more. We wanted it to really be a multicultural community. We wanted it to be a place where differences of perspective and values and experiences were not only just tolerated, because that's a word that I always struggled with, but actually understood, embraced, and celebrated.
To be able to talk about things that students of color or Black and Hispanic, Black and Latina students wanted the organization to do as a contribution to the community, as well as a way of providing solidarity and a sense of belonging for themselves, was really one of the key things that we did.
We wanted to be multicultural. We wanted it to be entrenched in the fiber and the core of who we were as an institution, and to see it as part of the excellence that the school is known to have.
We have 35 clubs and organizations under the CAMD office. Many of them are cultural clubs. AFLADAM, in fact, is our oldest cultural club. Started as an affinity group and is a cultural club in that it is now open for anyone to come who's interested in learning and engaging in issues related to what it means to be Black.
AFLADAM was definitely important for helping with that transition. Being African American and coming to a place like Andover, which was just different culturally from that perspective. It was also different because I grew up in a neighborhood that was lower middle class to poor, and now suddenly I was in an environment where there was kids were from all across the socioeconomic spectrum.
Many of us, including myself, came from a background where most of the people who live near where we live look like us, right? So I mentioned I grew up here in DC, and even DC is a lot different now than it was back in the 80s and 90s. So my neighborhood was predominantly Black. My school was predominantly Black. And when you leave a situation like that, I mentioned that was the only school I had been to prior to Andover. So when you leave a segregated neighborhood, essentially, and you go to a place like Andover, where most of the people didn't come from a neighborhood like yours, and most of the people don't look like you, it's a bit of a culture shock, to be honest with you, and it's a huge adjustment.
AFLADAM was great in terms of study programs and things of that nature, where some teachers even committed their time to ensure that we were doing our best with respect to studying and growing in terms of our study habits, doing our best with respect to exams. So it was very, very helpful for that transition, both academically as well as socially and culturally.
AFLADAM, I think the purpose was not only to support students of African American and Latino origin, but also to celebrate culture and to educate the broader community.
From my day when I came in 1988 through my time when I graduated in 91, AFLADAM was super critical. I'm not sure how well I would have adjusted, had it not been for AFLADAM.
We also sponsored the Black Arts Weekend. We sponsored several key dances. We created an organization called NELSA, New England Association of Latino and African American Students. I mean, we created the anti-racism workshops. It was a busy time. And I think that there were students who thought that was enough. And then there were other students who thought we weren't doing enough at all.
One of these students, who Kathy Royal refers to, is the person around which the narrative of this film revolves. This is the student who, in his senior year, protested against school tradition and fought for the celebration of Dr. King's birthday. Before 1990, Phillips Academy did not cancel classes to honor Dr. King. As Don McNamara describes, however, Phillips Academy already held an all-school meeting in the evening for Dr. King.
The day was celebrated, but it was celebrated with an all-school meeting, a special meeting that had a speaker that was relevant to Martin Luther King and his nonviolence and his commitment to change and his focus on overcoming race issues in our society. But the faculty had been discussing the question, should we or shouldn't we have classes? And Andover faculty are great teachers, and they love to teach, and they value education in important ways. And so there was hesitation not to hold classes on the day.
The faculty didn't just want the day off. They didn't want the day to be wasted. So the question quickly became, how do we honor Dr. King? Is what we are doing enough? What more can we do?
There were certainly students who thought we should be doing more, and there were faculty and staff who said, what else can we do? Is there more we can do? Should it be a day without classes? And that was a question on people's mind and that people were raising in the 1980s.
Canceling classes was an idea that had been in the administration for years, but no action had yet been taken, until, of course, the winter of 1989.
It was just something that was so obvious and that I would consider sort of low-hanging fruit in terms of recognition of this as a national holiday, but it stopping or pausing as a very tangible symbol of celebration of diversity and multiculturalism. And it was just dissonance there that I couldn't ignore.
I mean, it didn't come just out of the blue.
To do something was probably something that had been kind of brewing for a couple of weeks before. It was coming up again. And mind you, the story goes back beyond that, because I was a 4-year senior at the time. And so realized I had gone through 3 years of this and nothing.
We talked about it, and I said, well, we're working on something, and something's going to happen. It wasn't happening fast enough for Brian, and that was really a defining moment.
And I kind of tongue-in-cheek say that Andover sort of built this monster, so to speak, or gave me the confidence to go there, but it just took time. So it was a developmental process. As I learned more, I gained more confidence in who I was as a person, as a student, as a young man, okay? And it just came to a head my senior year, and a couple things happened, First of all, it's my senior year, that's it, right? So you get that kind of feeling anyways. I think that sense of ownership for the and commitment to the community happens over time. You grow to love Andover as a place, because it was kind of rocky beginning. It was kind of a love-hate relationship, I love, I don't know who loved who or hated who, but, was those deals. And it was turning 18 as well. My birthday is January 14th, the day before Martin Luther King's birthday, okay? And I just turned 18, and everything that comes with that as well. So it was a defining moment. It was a coming-of-age moment for me personally, but more importantly, it was something that I thought I had to do for the community. I
mean, he had been talking about it, and lots of other students had been talking about it as well, but that day he got up and he did it. And students came and said, Brian's over there protesting. We went with it.
So the night before, in the dorm, a couple of buds, and I said, hey, I think I'm going to do this. And yeah, Brian, that's a great idea. I think I'm with you. We're on board. And so we'll get into the story of it. But I said, fine. Okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make some posters. We're going to meet it in the Commons at lower right at 7:30 in the morning or something, because I want to get the posters things up before, the 8 o'clock classes started. That was the plan. It was like this big, ninja coup thing we were going to do. And I showed up at Commons at 7:30, and I was alone. Markers, poster board, and I had a little cassette player. You go to a museum, you may find one of these now. It's a cassette player with I had recorded some speeches from Martin Luther King Day, Letters to Birmingham Jail, I Have a Dream and things like that. I had several books. They had some nice poems and, Langston Hughes. I mean, just all your sort of classics, if you will, We Shall Overcome, the lyrics and all that stuff. So I had my Martin Luther King Day kit, if you will, and I showed up at Commons, and I was there alone. And that was really the crux for me. That was really the moment of reckoning. How deep was my commitment, my conviction? Am I going to do this or not? So I made my signs. I put one up, I believe, in the science building, and I went over to GW. I put a sign up there, and the last sign I put up right in one of the pillars, Samuel Phillips Hall, and turned my radio on. It's getting close to 8 o'clock about that time, and I sat. Didn't say anything, but you heard I Have a Dream blaring, and I sat under my sign.
People started to pass by. Seeing Brian on the steps, they asked about his protest. Very quickly, conversations spread around campus about Brian's activism and the limited recognition of Dr. King's birthday. Some students continued to walk by, but others joined the protest confidently.
So I grew up in Memphis, right, where, certainly it was the site of the assassination of Martin Luther King. I grew up knowing that. I didn't really, I guess, as a young kid, have a good appreciation for that. But one of the things I always just took for granted was that we were always out of school for Martin Luther King Day, right? I mean, that was, I remember in kindergarten first going to school, and we were out of school suddenly on this day, and it was just something normal. Right, we never went to school on Martin Luther King Day, and so when I got to Andover, I was new, and I said, well, things are different. I'm from Memphis. I'm in Massachusetts, and it's a totally different school, different from any school I've ever been to. And so I'll just do as the Romans do, and I said, well, they go to school on Martin Luther King Day. I'm not used to that, but I'll go. And so from 8 to 8:45, I was in class, and that class was in Sam Phil. Right, so I walked out of the front steps of Sam Phil like I did every day, and I saw Brian Gittens sitting to my left with a radio playing speeches from Martin Luther King, and so I asked, I said, what's going on? I'm not sure if I asked him directly or if I asked maybe 5 or 6 other kids sitting with him. I asked one of them, and they were saying, well, we shouldn't go to school on Martin Luther King Day, and so we're sitting here to protest. In a sense, going to school on Martin Luther King Day, we should be doing something else, something more conducive or constructive towards better race relations at Andover as well as in our country. And so when I heard those words, I just felt it was the right thing to do, to just sit down. I wasn't going to go to class, and I didn't really give a whole lot of thought. I mean, I was 15, I guess, and so I didn't give a lot of thought to the consequences entirely. I just figured, well, I'll tell my teachers that I decided not to come to class today.
I guess the feeling of sense on the steps was, first of all, it was January in Massachusetts, so it was probably about 30 degrees or so, and I think I was so caught up in the activity that I didn't plan accordingly, because if you look at the pictures, you'll see I have no hat, no gloves, and just whatever jacket I had at the time, so not prepared for a long stay exposed to the elements. And as you know, the steps are like concrete or something like that too. So that was a pretty miserable time physically. But what warmed me though was the camaraderie and the students starting to come by and we started to sing. And this thing took on sort of a life of its own. In terms of not telling administrators or working through quote-unquote the proper channels, it didn't matter to me. And I didn't want the people with that lens of wisdom of age probably, or had consequences and the bureaucracy. I didn't want that to interfere with my laser-like focus on what I was doing. Didn't want to be talked out of it. I had to reconcile what I wanted to do. I had to reconcile why and things like that and make sure I was doing it for the right reasons. But there was a certain amount of legitimacy, I would say, once you start to see faculty members.
So I can't recall the exact sequence of events, but what I can remember is that I was walking from Bullfinch to GW, and I saw that there was this one student sitting on the steps of Sam Phil. I could also hear that something was being played. And so the closer I got, I recognized that it was Martin Luther King's voice, and that this was a student who was clearly presenting some kind of protest. And he was also handing out, I believe, sheets of paper with King's remarks, an address that King had given. After I went by there, I decided, and it was a beautiful day, that I would bring all my English classes to the steps of Sam Phil to join in with that protest and to support what Brian was trying to accomplish.
And he wasn't the only one, but I think what he did was brought each of his classes in turn to sit and later on, in reflecting and speaking with him, it was a true education. This is what education really is about. Not necessarily what you read in books, but to capture this moment in history, in the school's history, and be a part of it, to see it in action. There's no greater means of educating. As I reflect on the day, it transitions from me doing something to something was happening. There was a movement happening throughout the day as it evolved, as instructors started bringing their students out, as we probably had 200 to 300 students out at one time, as the Boston Globe was there, okay, and we were on the 6 o'clock news that evening, okay. So it was something was happening there that was bigger than I had imagined or I had planned for. It ended with the group that was still there, probably 50 or 75 students or so, marching to the chapel at the start of the official event that was already planned for Martin Luther King Day. So it was a natural end to the protest. And so we were out there, I was out there personally from about 8 o'clock that morning until 6 o'clock. Friends bringing me trays of food from the Commons throughout the day at lunchtime, because I didn't move, at lunchtime and for dinner. And the bell started to ring, and we grabbed our radio and our posters, and we all marched together along the walk to the chapel, singing, "We Shall Overcome." And that's when I felt really supported, because here we are about to walk united toward the campus-sponsored event. The speakers were up there, the administration was there up front, and here we are.
History is not something that was just made a long time ago. History is something that's made every day, right? Each one of you at Andover today are making history, right? Each one of you is leaving your footprint on Andover for the next generation of students who come behind you, right? And so we were just a part of that narrative, that same stream of leaving our own footprint.
I try to make my students aware that they have a lot of power, but don't realize it. And the wonderful thing about Brian Gittens was that it was a single student who acted on his own consciousness, and he showed the entire school that with a moral imperative, you can change the ethos of an entire institution.
So, and I kind of joke about this, they kind of create this monster themselves through education and empowerment. They empowered me to do this. They allowed me to put this mirror up to the very institution that armed me with this wonderful knowledge, this conviction, reading about Mahatma Gandhi, reading about Martin Luther King, nonviolent protest, philosophy.
He saw his role as a member of that community as one that called upon him to really kind of stand up for something that he believed in.
And it's a marvelous lesson, and it continues to be. And every Martin Luther King Day, I bring it up in class. I bring up what he accomplished. Because kids often feel like they're powerless around here. They're not, they have plenty of power. It's a matter of realizing it, acting on it, and having something really important to say.
However empowering and seemingly successful the protest was, there were certainly people who disagreed with Brian's actions.
You know, there was lots of conversation on the faculty about Go Brian. And there was conversation around who does he think he is.
Everybody, there was some criticism, right? It wasn't like this whole kumbaya moment afterwards. Oh yeah, go, you did the right thing. It was split. And the criticisms came from some unlikely sources.
Now what do we do as a result of this student taking a stand and other students joining him? And the conversation was, do we put him out because he is disrupting the school? Now, I don't know if Brian knows that part of the story or not, but the conversation at my side of the table was absolutely not.
The headline of the article was Gittens with reservations. You should have done this, you should have signed a petition, you should have gone to the student affairs, whatever. No, you had your chance. Years and years and years. So for the person who wrote the article said, why didn't you do something before? I would say, why didn't the administration do something before? I graduated that June, and I was off to Emory University, that fall. And I got a call from Bobby and says, I got great news, brother. And I go, what? He goes, they're not gonna have regular classes. They got this programming and things like that, lined up for Martin Luther King Day, and he said, and it's a tribute to you.
He certainly was the arrowhead. And once that position was taken, it galvanized the community. And the planning of the MLK Day then became part of the responsibility of CAMD.
I think the feeling, and it was broad, it wasn't just the head, but it was faculty, staff, students, were really committed to how do we make this an engaging day in which Andover students, faculty, and staff talk about racism and stereotypes and change in American society.
When we walk into a room and, I can't look at you and not see who you are. And often in my life, I've been told by those of the majority, when they look at me, Bobby, I don't see your race, I just see you. And I understand where that comes from, and I understand what they're trying to say, but I feel an obligation to say, but you must see my race, because if you don't see my race, you don't understand my journey. You don't understand my perspective. You don't understand that if a police officer pulls up behind me in my car, that I don't feel the same level of safety and comfort that you may feel, because if I look at the tradition of what often happens to people who look like me sometimes at the hands of those who are actually there to protect us, it's not always very encouraging and often ends in tragedy.
I guess the thing that I sensed was just tremendous commitment on the part of students, faculty, and staff to have those conversations, and recognition and honesty about how difficult they are, and efforts to say, how can we structure this so this really happens? And so the celebration was some service, some workshops and confrontation of racism, and a celebratory school meeting that brought the whole community together that evening.
We were introducing material, bringing speakers, and largely it was the CAMD staff and the Multicultural Advisory Committee who put the program together.
My mother's mother was German. My mother's father was Danish. My father's mother was African American, Native American. My father's father was Filipino, Chinese. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but I grew up in Japan. And that's why they call me Ethnic Man.
shortly after I stepped into my role in the office, I put together a group of students. We did a call, a community-wide call, and I asked students to come and get involved in planning this day. And I always begin, when we have our very first meeting, I ask all the students to go around and I ask them, what is it about MLK that inspired them?
What just sort of the entire state of New Jersey where I grew up, the idea was MLK Day was a state holiday, which meant that all government auspices were closed, including schools. So MLK Day was just an excuse to go to the beach. There was an essay writing contest in my town, which started in the last couple years that I was there, and it encouraged you to write 500 words on what MLK Day meant to you. But that was really the only opportunity to talk about Dr. King, and 500 words is not enough. What Andover does differently is that instead of it being a day off, the phrase we use is that it's a day on. And I love that about Andover, that you actually take on more activities and more responsibility to learn and better yourself as a person, which will then contribute to bettering the community.
It also allows some flexibility because there's many workshops offered. It's not just one that the whole school goes to. There's some on race, there's some on gender, like there's some as close to home as the merger between Abbott and Phillips. There's student-run ones from out of the blue.
I think that the great thing about MLK Day workshops are that like they're not like people like teaching lessons. They're not like here's what's bad about racism, here's what's bad about sexism, whatever. It's like people who are coming in who have experienced really, really like tough situations, or even the situations that a lot of Andover students find themselves in, and are able to share like personal stories about those experiences.
Sure. Last year I went to a workshop that was led by a trans man. He was a poet, and he talked about his experience with being trans, and that's something that I will never have to deal with. And and it was just very eye-opening to really see to listen to his experiences, and also he mentioned the fact that there's just such a plurality of experiences within the trans community too, and I thought that was really eye-opening.
It was very powerful, I think, to have to sort of try and list where you stood in terms of your own identity and in terms of what components of your identity are actually determined by social factors and whose importance is sort of escalated because of that.
For me, it's just it's a time for me to reflect about my own identity and where I fall in this community, and also to consider all of the good that I can still do and what other people can still do.
For somebody like me, it is a time to sort of talk or to sort of look, to introspectively analyze my own experiences as a woman and as a queer person, both of which have been systematically oppressed in the past in America. But it's also a time to reconcile myself with what it means to be white and what it means to be white in America.
My favorite thing at MLK Day at Andover has probably always been the ASM speaker. It's something about the whole school being in the chapel and one person coming and telling us their story. And my favorite speaker, he kept telling us anecdotes upon anecdotes about students that he's helped, students that come from impoverished or disadvantaged situations, and how he's helped them succeed. And those sort of stories are just so empowering, and the fact that he's looking out for them, and he's looking out and trying to spread that so that we can one day combat all the hardships that they've faced.
So I do a lot of work with Asian American students on campus, and a lot of what we say is it's so important to share your stories, because Asians and Asian American students are often the racial and ethnic groups that are most silenced, right? That never share their stories. And I've learned so much in the past 2 years that when you can encourage people who have never shared their stories before to tell their story for the first time, for the second time, for the third time, and really bring out that emotion that has always been embedded in them, that really helps people connect.
I will tell you, at the end of every MLK Day, doesn't matter who the speaker has been, I've been doing it for 9 years, someone or someone's come to me and they say, "Oh, thank you. That was the best speaker I have ever seen on this campus." And I start to think, well, last year we had this person and we had this person, and oh my God, this person has been here. But every year, people are impacted in very different ways.
The event, the day, involves a lot of people, and everybody has a key part in that. And I just started the conversation, I think. in that regard. And you needed something like that. When you have a very traditional institution, and this is kind of getting to some of my classes and change management and things like that, sometimes you need a jolt to the system to get it to redirect, to get to change how it's always done business. And I like to think that I've provided that jolt to the system.
And so as we've looked at the growth of our nation, the diversity, the demographics, the globalization, we've come to recognize that it's not enough to just expect and require students to attend MLK Day and maybe one workshop.
In many ways, the problems of today are not unlike those of the 1960s. Decades of redlining, the practice of denying or charging Black Americans more for basic services, racial profiling, and other discriminatory policies have created two Americas. There's a tremendous issue when currently the United States incarcerates a higher proportion of Blacks than apartheid South Africa did. As rapper Nas said in his song America, we in chronic need of a second look of the law books and our society as a whole.
I think of a time when I was standing in front of a restaurant in Boston, and a white woman came up to me. I just finished having dinner with an Andover trustee on top of another African American, and we're standing there, and a white woman comes up, and she comes up and hands me her ticket to go get her car. She assumes that I'm the valet at the restaurant. There's only one thing that would make her assume that. And that had to be the color of my skin, because I clearly was not dressed in a red jacket like the other valets were. But, that, and
to those of you feeling silenced by these conversations about race in fear of seeming racist or offensive, regardless of your intentions, silence as a means of listening and gathering your thoughts is a great thing, but permanent silence is harmful. We need to have conversations, and we will make mistakes. We must challenge ourselves to step outside of our comfort zones, and we cannot avoid challenges related to race.
And as someone who I read once said, there are no easy solutions, but let's talk.
What I want Andover to be when I come back 5 or 10 years from now is a school where we're not afraid to sacrifice, like Brian Gittens did, with like his entire day of classes, or we're not afraid to sacrifice like the traditions that our school and our community has operated under for 200 plus years.
I mean, just the fact that we have Martin Luther King Day off at Andover, right, which we didn't, right, showed that willingness to step forward and progress, right? And change doesn't happen overnight, right? So, we all may have this ideal with respect to where we should be. That's not going to happen in an hour or a day or a week or a year, right?
We don't see this as this would be a nice thing to do. Oh, it's wonderful to learn about various cultures and to have a better understanding of race and class. This is essential.
And we've like started on those steps in the past couple years, but we're just not there yet. And we just have to keep fighting. We have to keep working.
Maybe there are several courses in the English department. Maybe there are a couple of courses in history. But how do we prepare you and every other student at Phillips Academy for the globalization, the diversity, the understanding of privilege that you will all face when you leave Phillips Academy and you enter the working world?
It's important to know, for all of us to know our history as human beings, right? That it's important for many, many reasons, right? One, we make mistakes in the past, so we don't repeat those mistakes. It's important to know our history such that our future is better than our past, right? It's also important to appreciate the sacrifices that others have made before us, right? That we're standing on the shoulders of others. We're not, we like to think we're pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, and our hard work does count, right? It counts within the context of the hard work of others who came before you.
The timing of this is actually uncanny. I reached out to Brian because we were celebrating 25 years. I thought it was a historic moment, quarter of a century, that it would be wonderful to bring back Brian to campus. However, with what is happening in the nation right now, the activism of young people who are out protesting on various college campuses across the nation in various cities. The timing could not be better in that young people on this campus are asking me, what does it mean to be an activist? How can I be an activist? What kind of stand can I take? What should I do? How should I do it? They're asking for help and guidance.
It would have been easy for me to go to class today. It is easy for a person on the outside to say that I just wanted to get out of class. It is easy to accept things as they are and not challenge them. That is not what Dr. King wanted or stood for. He did not take the easy way out because he believed in something, although it conflicted with the norm. And I too believe in something. I believe that this community, this school, this part of our lives should be changed. Dr. King stood for the advancement of black people and all people everywhere. I feel a responsibility to honor him on Martin Luther King Day. It's the very least I could do.